I am not sorry for something I didn't do, and I am not sorry for the things I did do.
First, we have the story of Scott Nelson, who was sentenced for the abduction and murder of 55-year-old Jennifer Fulford in September 2017. Nelson kidnapped Fulford, who was working as a caregiver, from the Winter Park home where she worked and later killed her. Fulford had been working as a caregiver for an elderly couple, and Nelson had been hired to do some yard work for the couple. Nelson had reportedly been watching Fulford for several days before he kidnapped her, tied her up, and drove her to several ATMs to withdraw money from her accounts. When asked about his crime, Fulford made a lot of satirical remarks that got many wondering if he was a businessman. His satire continued as the lawyer asked him about the details of his crime. Upon further questioning, he admitted to the killing of Jennifer Fulford, but claimed that his intention was not to kill her because she didn't do anything to him. During the trial, it was revealed that Nelson had a history of violent crimes, including robbery and assault. He was also described as a career criminal who had spent most of his adult life in and out of prison. In his defense, Nelson's lawyers argued that he had a history of mental illness, but the jury ultimately rejected this argument and found him guilty of first-degree murder. However, his words and defense didn't match his sociopathic responses and lack of remorse for his actions. And because of this, he was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, to the displeasure of others like TJ, who covered the case and wished that Nelson had been given a death sentence. At the sentencing hearing, Jennifer Fulford's family members shared emotional statements about the impact of her death on their lives. One of her sons, Jesse Fulford, spoke about the pain and grief that he and his family had experienced since his mother's death. He also expressed his hope that Nelson would never be released from prison. Next, we have Ronnie O'Neal III, a man who made headlines for his heinous crimes in Riverview, Florida. In March 2021, he was found guilty of the murder of his girlfriend, Kenyatta Barron, and their 9-year-old daughter, Ronivia O'Neal, and the attempted murder of his son, who was only 8 years old at the time. He had shot his girlfriend, hit his daughter several times with a hatchet, then stabbed his 9-year-old son before pouring gasoline all over the house and setting it on fire. However, O'Neal's son was able to escape with a stab wound and several burns, and his father, O'Neal, was arrested while he was fleeing the house. Prior to that, 911 had received 2 calls. One had been from his girlfriend, Kenyatta, who had been heard screaming before suddenly hanging up, and the second one was from O'Neal 8 minutes after the first, claiming that he had been attacked by some white demons.
911, what is your emergency?
Hey, I just been attacked by some white demons inside Kiki. Kiki, her name is Kiki, and she tried to kill me.
What's she at?
Huh?
The trial lasted for 2 weeks, and during his sentencing hearing, O'Neal chose to represent himself and delivered a rambling, profanity-laced, and sometimes incoherent statement to the court. He also cross-examined his son, who he stabbed, asking him to confirm whether or not he had stabbed him.
It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
Did I hurt you that night of this incident?
Yes,
I did. And how did I hurt you?
you stabbed me.
He began his speech with a request to be found not guilty, insisting that the evidence against him was a fraudulent dam recording and that he had been set up by the police.
Because he's playing a fraudulent damn recording of me beating Kenyatta Barron. I did kill Kenyatta Barron.
Shortly after, he pleaded guilty by admitting that he had killed Kenyatta. He also stated that he was not sorry for what he did. In his words, "I am not sorry for something I didn't do, and I am not sorry for the things I did do."
I am not sorry for something I didn't do, and I am not sorry for the things I did do.
O'Neal was given a total of 3 life sentences with an additional 90 years without the possibility of parole. And as for his son, he was adopted by the detective who had worked on his case and cared for him on the night of the murders. After O'Neal had been sentenced, the judge went on to say that O'Neal's case was the worst one she had ever dealt with.
This is the worst case ever in my life, and I have seen some horrors.
Moving on, we have Luis Bracamontes, a man who was convicted of murdering 2 law enforcement veteran officers, Deputy Danny Oliver and Detective Michael Davis Jr., in 2014 in Sacramento, California. Bracamontes, an illegal immigrant with a criminal history, had a history of drug abuse and mental illness. He is being charged with 15 counts, and the trial was highly publicized and gained national attention due to his erratic behavior in the courtroom. He disrupted the proceedings, laughed during a witness testimony, and even threatened to kill his defense attorneys. During the sentencing phase of the trial, Bracamontes made several disturbing statements. In a video of the sentencing hearing, Bracamontes can be heard saying that he didn't regret his actions, but regretted killing just 2 cops.
I don't regret that. The only thing that I regret is that I was killed too. I wish I killed more of those mother.
He also laughed and smiled during the hearing, prompting the judge to have him escorted out of the courtroom. While leaving, he managed to get one more threat out. He said,
I will break out soon and I will kill more.
"I'm going to kill more cops soon." At another point in the hearing, Bracamontes interrupted the prosecutor and said, "I will break out soon and I will kill more."
Break out soon and I will kill more.
Bracamontes' behavior during the trial was seen as outrageous and disrespectful to the families of the slain officers. In court, he was seen smiling and blowing kisses at his fans and even pretended to shoot a gun at them using his fingers. Eventually sentenced to death in March 2018, which was made easy because of his uncouth and erratic behavior during the trial. Next is John Spooner, a 76-year-old man who fatally shot his 13-year-old neighbor, Darius Simmons, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 2012. Spooner was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide, which he had committed in broad daylight, and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. On the day of the crime, Darius Simmons could be seen taking his trash out. Simeon, on the other hand, can be seen leaving his house with a gun in his hand. Shortly after, he can be seen pointing the gun at Darius and then at Darius's mother, who was standing in the doorway. She had asked him why he was pointing a gun at her son, and his response was to point the same gun at her. A few minutes later, Spooner can be seen pointing the gun at Darius again and firing a shot. Spooner's trial was highly emotional, with the victim's mother and older brother testifying against Spooner in court. During the trial, it was revealed that Spooner had a history of racist attitudes and animosity toward his neighbors. His interrogation video was played live in court, emphasizing his lack of remorse.
Somebody with that gun. Yes, I did. Who did you shoot? I guess a 13-year-old kid. When you say you guess, that's what her mother said.
Upon further questioning, he admitted that he had considered shooting Darius's older brother, but didn't because of the number of bystanders that had gathered at the time. Finally, we have Keith Ferguson, a 40-year-old man who was convicted for the murder of his ex-wife, Tiffany Ferguson. They had been arguing about getting a divorce, and he had suddenly started beating her and shooting her in the presence of their 4 kids. After shooting Tiffany, he had taken his kids and driven to Tiffany's parents' house, where he had fired a gun at his father-in-law. After that, he fled the scene and stormed into a nearby house, taking the owner hostage and barricaded himself inside the house. After a 7-hour standoff, he was finally arrested by the police and charged to court. During his trial, he showed no remorse and was disobedient to the point of being rude to the judge.
The defendant has already murdered multiple people and fled and has taken hostages.
Furthermore, at his sentencing, Tiffany's best friend gave a victim impact statement saying that she always knew that Keith would one day hurt his wife.
I knew one day we would show her.
When asked about his children, Keith stated that he never wanted to see them again. In his words, "I don't want them to see me." Keith Ferguson was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole after the judge had stated that Keith may not meet the clinical definition of insanity, but something was fundamentally wrong with him.
May not meet the clinical definition of insanity, but there's clearly something fundamentally wrong with you.
This is exceptionally true based on the uncouth behavior he displayed during his trial. And on leaving the court, he parted with a statement saying that he'll see everyone present at the trial in hell.
I'll see y'all in hell.
And there you have it, folks. 5 killers who showed absolutely no remorse in court for their heinous crimes. It's both baffling and terrifying to imagine what goes on in the minds of such individuals. Are they truly incapable of feeling any sort of empathy or remorse for the lives they've taken? Or is it a facade they put on to avoid facing the reality of their actions? It's a question we may never have a definitive answer to. But one thing's for sure, their victims and their families will never forget the pain and suffering they caused.